Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. Isis, Imitation of Life. The Goddess Next Door helps a young black girl overcome racism during the era of Jim Crow in this Golden Age Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Imitation of Life in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. I got a comment by Joel Henry on my video, Black Characters by Black Creators versus Black Characters by White Creators, that I have to address in a video. And your Joel Henry goes on to make the statement, I like Dwayne McDuffie a lot, but I think Icon is probably the worst black character ever created. You have a man with the power of Superman, and not only did he not liberate black people from slavery, he didn't even liberate himself. I think that this says a lot about the psychological damage that has been done to black creatives, even someone as independently minded as Dwayne McDuffie. Imagine Superman with all this godlike power choosing to remain in slavery. That character cannot be a hero. And I listened to that statement, and it's clear to me that Joel really does not understand what the character Icon is all about, nor does he understand how Icon was a hero during that time period, nor does he understand the context of the history Dwayne McDuffie was exploring when he came up with the Icon concept. Now, as someone who has read Icon #1, I understand why Dwayne McDuffie wrote the character the way he did. Because Augustus Freeman, or Arcus, was someone who got into an escape pod, and he landed on planet Earth. And when he landed on planet Earth, he took the form of the people he was closest by. And the form he took was that of a baby. So he took the form of a black baby. Now you have a being who has come from another planet, and he doesn't know anything about the culture, he doesn't know anything about the civilization, and he's coming in blind just like a slave would come in during the Middle Passage of slavery. And the only way he could learn about America was through the culture he was taught by his adopted mother. And the culture that his mother taught him was the culture of slavery in the antebellum South. So you have this alien, he's coming into this country that he knows nothing about, he knows nothing about the culture, and he is being indoctrinated into the culture of white supremacy. So there's no way he could come in with this radicalized mind talking about he's going to liberate black people, because he's learning the culture of white supremacy from day one. And as he's learning this culture, he's learning how to try to work around the culture just like every other black person at the time. It's just like with Superman. Superman came here from Krypton as a baby, and he learned a culture from his mother. So the culture he was taught is what he learned, and that's how he learned how to survive in the world of America. So as I was reading this Icon #1, I understood that the character Augustus Freeman could not go on to liberate black people from slavery at the time, because he was learning about American culture from the slaves himself. So he couldn't do anything, because he had to learn how to assimilate into society without making too much noise to reveal who he really was. Moreover, if he went out here and took action against these racists, what would happen would be that not only would he face resistance from the white racists, he would also face resistance from many of the blacks in society who benefited from white supremacy, such as many of the black female bed wenches and many of the slaves who were considered to be trustees, and even that black pastor. So there was a group of blacks who were benefiting from white supremacy, and these blacks, they would have probably turned on Augustus Freeman in the same way they probably turned on Nat Turner and many other blacks who participated in ideas for slave rebellion. So him going to try to liberate black people, that would be a futile cause, because there's no way he could have liberated black people, because a lot of black people had already been mentally enslaved. So I understood what Dwayne McDuffie was trying to say with the icon character, in that his hands were really, really tied. So there was only so much he could do in that situation. So I don't see any psychological damage done to Dwayne McDuffie as related to the icon character. What I see what he did was do meticulous research on the period of history at the time, and understood that what meant to be a hero that at that time was completely different than what it would mean to be a hero in 1992 when Raquel Irvin met Icon. So I understand that during the period of slavery and during the period of Jim Crow, a lot of times black people had to walk on eggshells. So we couldn't have some hyper-masculine superhero going around tossing around white people and beating up white people, because that would alert other racists and white supremacists in the government and make life more dangerous for other black peoples. Because this was a subject I explored in my recent ISIS series book, ISIS Imitation of Life. And in ISIS Imitation of Life, ISIS expresses a lot of frustration about being in the Jim Crow period, and she would like to do more to help black people, but her hands are tied, because in this government you have all of these racists creating policies like Jim Crow in the South, and you have discriminatory policies in the North. And some superpowered black person would make life a lot harder for a lot of black people, because you have groups like the Ku Klux Klan running around, and if they see this superpowered black person, what they're going to do is rally up a group of white people to go do things like burn down more towns like Rosewood and Black Wall Street, or participate in the lynchings of innocent black people or black people who were close to the heroes. So a black person in these tense times from slavery all the way to Jim Crow, they would have to apply a different strategy to being a hero. And this is something that I explored not only in ISIS Imitation of Life, but I also explore it in the first ISIS book that I wrote back in 1999, because in that first ISIS book, I talk about the psychological damage that white supremacy can do to the mind of even a Nubian god, because ISIS migrated from Japan to America, and it's her going to America that leads to her having severe mental issues, because she has to try to assimilate into this culture, and it does psychological damage to her mind. And the psychological damage is so great that she literally, with all of her godlike power, watches as her husband, Joe Robinson, is lynched, and watches as her baby son is murdered. And she literally comes to the point of the reality to her mind in the first ISIS, and realizes that she played a part in killing her husband and son, not by participating in the violence, but letting that lynching go on, even though she had the power to stop it. And what made her not do anything was her fear that she had learned from white supremacy, because being a part of the white supremacist culture and living it every day, it becomes a part of your mind. And this is what led to ISIS really grieving and feeling guilty about things, because she believes that she killed her husband and son by not doing anything and being a part of that government, believing in that Constitution, believing in those laws, and believing in those unwritten social rules of the South. By being a part of the culture, and doing what the culture said was right, she let her husband and son die. And this is something that stays with her even into today's time period. So I understand what Dwayne McDuffie was doing with Icon, because when I was writing ISIS and I was doing research on racism and Jim Crow, I understood that that time period, there was only so much a superpowered person could do, because this was a very tense time period. It was a very troubling time period, and not only were looking out for your others, you were also looking out for yourself, because your actions could lead to severe consequences for others, because black people are judged like this. The actions of one black person affect all black people. So if your icon was to go out here and start beating up on white folks, then those white folks could retaliate against other black people, and it could cost the loss of more human lives. So what a hero has to do is find another way to save lives. And this is something I explore in Isis Imitation of Life, because the Isis character realizes, even though she is angry and frustrated about the state of the black community and the way black people are treated in a second-class status, she cannot go out here and be some hyper-feminine or hyper-masculine superhero who goes out and beats up on people. No, she has to apply a different strategy, and that strategy that she applies is based on the old African proverb, a race can rise no higher than the moral position of its women, and as the woman goes, so goes the race. So, applying the philosophy from the old African proverb, Isis creates the sorority, the Thetas, so that she can teach black women a culture that will allow them to see their value and have a place where they can be elevated to a high moral position, and use that high moral position to teach a culture where women learn to value themselves and then pass those values on to their children. So her way of being a hero was the way I saw black people being heroes during the dark period of slavery and Jim Crow, where we had people like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, your Ida B. Wells, your Mary McLeod Bethune. These people were heroes because they were teachers, they were lawyers, they were writers, and the culture that they created and preserved for black people, that allowed us to lay the foundation for the civil rights movement. Everything with heroes isn't about just saving the world. Sometimes having an impact on a single person's life can transform someone's life. So for us, black people, a hero isn't a guy in a cape going out saving the world. A hero could be someone who changes the way we think. And I go in depth in that with Isis Imitation of Life, where Isis and her Theta sisters go out of their way to educate a young, educated black woman who just got her master's degree about how to value herself and how to value being black and love being black, because that's how you get to the high moral position, and that's how you get true liberation. Because if Icon was to go out here and liberate black people and, defeat the white people, this is something Osiris talks about in the first Isis, what would they learn? Because they would still have that same colonizer's mindset. They would still be like the white people, and nothing would really change, because the only way people can find liberation is if their minds are liberated and their minds are opened up so that they can learn how to love being black, value being black, and see a worth in being black. And that's why when I looked at Icon, I was like, I understood again what Dwayne McDuffie was trying to say with the character, because when I was developing Isis, I wanted to show that the whole idea of killing all the white people, that just didn't work, because in one chapter
early in ISIS, Osiris explains to her how this just doesn't work. Because if he said, if the gods go out here and, destroy all the white people, where did they learn their culture and their ideas? They learned all their culture and ideas from white people, so they're going to participate in the same white supremacy and the culture of white supremacy that they learn. And the reason why the elder gods put Isis on the island was to deprogram her of those white supremacist ideals and those white supremacist ways of thinking, and get her back on a God center and get her to understand the way of God. That's what they wanted to do, because they knew if we put this goddess with this white supremacist thinking back on Earth, what would happen is she's already taken on this colonizer's mindset, and she's thinking about killing a whole bunch of white people in the same way these racists thought about killing black people. So that doesn't really make her a helpmeet to the world that she's supposed to be in. It makes her a threat to the world, and it leads to her destroying the world around her. So she wouldn't be a hero. What she would do is tragically and ironically fulfill the destiny that her father originally created for her, to be this goddess of retribution, the sword of Nubia. And what would happen is it would be done in the worst way. So in that part of the story, I was trying to show how the Heliopolitan gods had created a monster with this Isis character, and how she had to go on a God-centered path to find redemption. So she had to find a new way to do things and learn a new way. And as part of that, she had to understand things that she was doing just didn't work. So she had to learn a new way, and part of learning that new way was accepting, her human limitations, because Isis is the daughter of a Nubian slave and Osiris, the new Heliopolitan god. So with that character, I was trying to make the point, again, that, nobody can come out here and liberate black people from slavery, because, again, the slavery starts with you from day one. When you were born into this culture, you learn in this culture, and the only way for you to find liberation is for God to open up your mind and show you the truth about white supremacy. Now, a person with the power of Superman, like Isis, they could have God-like power, but if their mind is corrupted by white supremacy, what's going to happen is they're going to take on white supremacy, and they're never going to be able to overcome it because they're still caught up in it. It takes God to open up that person's mind for them to see a different perspective. And from that perspective, they learn how to be a hero. And part of being a hero is learning that sometimes the best approach to being a hero isn't beating up the bad guys and saving the world. Sometimes you have to use a different approach. And a lot of people during the Jim Crow period and during the period of slavery, they were heroes in a different way. And this is something a lot of people just don't understand about that era. And as someone who has studied black history myself, I understood what being a hero was during that period for black people. Because during the golden age of comic books, we didn't have any black heroes featured in pulp magazines like Doc Savage or The Shadow. I mean, the Avenger had 2 aides that helped him, but lead heroes, we didn't have any black heroes because whites controlled the media, whites controlled the media platforms, and they wanted to promote the idea of a supreme white male. And we didn't have any black publishers until about 1945, when John H. Johnson founded Johnson Publications. So from the 1930s, we did not have any black heroes because we had no black publishers, because the only way you could get black publications is if black people published them themselves. And during that time, we had a whole bunch of degrading images out there. And again, a guy who, even if he had those powers, he had to empower people in a different fashion. He could not go out here beating up people because, again, there were consequences to his actions. His actions not only affected him, it affected others. And this is something a lot of black people just don't understand about racism during Jim Crow in the South and the discriminatory period in the North. If one black person messed up, it affected all black people. It's similar to what happened when Nat Turner had his slave rebellion. Nat Turner went out here, he had his slave rebellion, and then later on, we had these laws passed where black people couldn't learn how to read, and black people's movements were heavily restricted. So a superpowered black person, what would happen is, as a result of that, is we would have the American government declaring war on all black people, and we would have a genocide similar to what went on in Nazi Germany. So when it comes down to a black hero, that's the reason why you didn't see characters like Icon talking about liberating black people from slavery, because they understood it was a very tense situation and they had to walk on eggshells if they hoped to achieve or accomplish anything in a constructive manner. Because you may have this incredible godlike power, but the humans around you are extremely fallible. And a lot of those people, they were very loyal to white supremacy. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand, is that you had a lot of mammies, you had a lot of Negro bed wenches, you had the black pastors, and you had a lot of the house slaves and the trustees who were loyal to white supremacy and gained benefits from white supremacy. So these people would work to undermine any sort of revolutionary, just like the people who worked with COINTELPRO went to undermine the Black Panthers. So when it comes down to the Icon character, he wasn't the worst black character ever created. He was a very well-crafted character. When I look at the way Dwayne McDuffie crafted that character, he clearly showed me that he did his research on the time period, he did his research on the history, and he understood the numerous social and political issues of the time. Because as I did my own research of the ISIS character for the first ISIS, where I talked about things going on during the 1880s, where we were at the height of lynching, it was a very tense time, and it was a very troubling time, and it took a psychological toll on the ISIS character, which led to her eventually winding up killing a bunch of Klansmen after watching the murder of her husband and son. And that's what led to the gods pulling her out of America, because they saw that she was going to be a threat not only to those white people, but a threat to herself as well, because she had become deeply troubled by that whole issue that was going on at the time, and that she would have been a danger to others, and she would have affected the lives of others in a way that would have led to her not being a hero, but eventually destroying the lives of all these black people all around her. So that's why they had the trial of the goddess and banished Isis to the island of solitude. And I understood that because, again, I did my research, and I understood that a person with godlike power who has dealt with this psychological trauma from being in racism, because ISIS was a free black, this person could do serious damage if they lost control of themselves. So I understood what was going on at the time period, and I understood why Icon had tremendous restraint. And it's very frustrating. It would be very frustrating for a person with that kind of power to hold back. But sometimes the best thing a hero can do is not do something, because him not doing something could save more lives than if he took action, because if he took action, it could lead to more people losing their lives. And this is a point I make in the first ISIS, and it's a point I also made in ISIS Imitation of Life, because you have to understand, again, the time period of the period of slavery and antebellum South, and you have to understand how tense things were during the period of Jim Crow. You have to understand those eras from a historical context to understand why Icon held back, because once you study the history, you'll understand that sometimes the only way to liberate someone really is to work on teaching, because the culture you learn is how you learn how to liberate your mind. And with the liberation of your mind, you can move forward. And when people liberate their minds, they can move forward. And the progress is not going to be super fast. It's a slow thing, because when it comes down to progress, it takes time to do things. It takes time to accomplish things. And you have to really deal with a lot of different setbacks and a lot of challenges. And this is something that a lot of people, they just don't understand about this icon character or the ISIS character. And you have to do your research, and you'll learn why things are the way they are. Because during the period of Jim Crow and during the period of slavery, the way black people were heroes wasn't going out here and taking on the bad guys. It was going out here and taking on the challenge of overcoming racism and white supremacy. And the only way they could take on racism and white supremacy was by working on liberating people's minds. And that's something that's very hard to capture inside the pages of a comic book. I made an effort to try to tell that story with ISIS Imitation of Life, and it's a story that I think more people need to read and more people need to take a look at, because in ISIS Imitation of Life, I show you how tough it is to be that type of hero in those dark times, and how it even takes a toll on ISIS even in that time. And it's something that we really need to explore in depth, because people need to understand that you cannot go out here and take fists to white supremacy, because white supremacy goes for people's minds, and it goes for the way that they think. And because white supremacy goes for the way people think, you need a teacher to combat it, because only a teacher can teach a culture that sets a direction for the black community. If you want to learn more about how the ISIS character overcame racism and Jim Crow, I urge you to pick up the first 2 books in the ISIS series, ISIS Trial of the Goddess and the ISIS Special Edition, and I also urge you to pick up ISIS Imitation of Life. All 3 of these books will give you a better understanding of that dark time period of slavery and Jim Crow, and they'll give you a better understanding of what it meant to be a hero in Black America. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.